Hello everyone, I'm Hussein Saaduddin from Jordan, and this is my presentation for the Developmental Psychopathology course taught by Dr. Maria Giedraitita at the Institute of Psychology, Faculty of Philosophy, Vilnius University. And as you all know, we as Erasmus students, since we came here, many things have changed in our lives, including food, of course. And because of that, I have become more interested in food throughout this semester and how food interacts with like culture, society, socialization, and even health, physical health, and of course mental health. And as a result of this interest, this is my presentation today: diet and mental health across cultures. But before I try to dive deeper in this topic, I just want to mention that this topic is quite controversial. Diet and nutrition in general is controversial, and there are a lot of studies and different opinions about that, and what we could say like healthy or unhealthy in this field. So, diet and mental health. In the context of developmental psychopathology, what that means. As we know, developmental psychopathology is a macro paradigm help us to understand mental disorders, how they develop through the lifespan by focusing on different factors like biological, psychological, environmental, etc. So we can understand diet in this context as a modifiable environmental factor, which means like if we can control this factor, we can shaping and to some extent the mental health outcomes, especially if we talk about like sensitive periods like childhood and adolescence, of course. Before we start to talk about different types of diets, there are a lot of diets out there. We should ask ourselves two questions. What makes a diet healthy? Because, as I said before, it's quite controversial. Like fibers is a good thing or a bad thing. We can say lean meat versus fat meat. Many things is controversial in this topic, and we have to keep that in our minds. The second question is, can one diet work for everyone? Or it's like more individual thing? Or we can say maybe there's general guidelines for healthy diet, and there are kind of customization for every individual. We should keep these questions in our mind when we talk about different types of diet. So, as common types of diets, I put some of them, not all of them. I think these are like the most common types of diet, represent many different cultures. The first one you can see Mediterranean diet, which is so popular in countries around the Mediterranean Sea, like Spain, Italy, some parts of France, Greece, of course, Turkey, Middle East, we can say, and North Africa. And this kind of diet focus on whole grains, olive oil, of course, vegetables and legumes and fish. And we will talk more about this diet specifically because I think this diet is the most evidence-based diet, let me say. And the second one is the Western diet. It's like typical diet for unhealthy, we can say, like high in processed food, red meats, refined carbs, sugar, beverage, etc. So all of these things unhealthy ingredients in any kind of diet. Also, there is quite interesting diet. I think it needs more focus. It's a ketogenic diet, and by the way, it's of course high fat, low carb diet. And the ketogenic diet was first developed in the 1920s by Dr. Russell Wilder at the Mayo Clinic, not as a weight loss method as many people thought, but as medical treatment for epilepsy. especially in children who didn't respond to medications. It was designed to mimic the effects of fasting, which had long been known to reduce seizures by putting the body into a state called ketosis, where it burns fat for energy instead of glucose. So I think it's interesting diet and needs more investigation and studies about. Also, vegetarian diet, as we know, it's exclude meat, and also vegan diet, which also exclude any animal products. Paleo diet, which try to eat like early humans, so they exclude grains, for example, and dairy. Also, some kind of traditional diets like Japanese, Nordic, Indian, etc. So these are like the common types of diets in the whole world. About healthy and versus unhealthy diets. In the context of the mental health, we can find an interesting study by O'Neill and his colleagues. This systematic study reviewed around 12 studies, and all of them about the relationship between mental health and diets, and they define or put kind of certain characteristics for um, what healthy diet looks like and what unhealthy diet looks like. So, according to them, healthy diet is balanced whole food based dietary pattern rich in nutrients. So, rich diets in nutrients considered as a healthy diet, and it's close to what we call it Mediterranean diet as a whole food diet. So this diet will give us the whole basic nutrients that we need, which is vitamins, water, of course minerals, protein, fats, and carbohydrates. And on the other hand, we have an unhealthy diet, which is, as we know, it's like more processed food, fatty meat, sugary, etc. All these things considered as like unhealthy diet. And according to this study, there was a significant correlation between poor diet and poor mental outcomes, especially when we talk about young people. And how can we understand this relation between diet and mental health? In fact, there are a lot of, we can say, mechanisms, and we can divide these mechanisms to two main ways: direct effects or mechanisms and indirect effects and mechanisms. As we know, dopamine, serotonin, GABA, etc., all these neurotransmitters are so essential and important for our mental health, and we know also even medications in psychiatry, they work on these neurotransmitters as a treatment for depression or, um, for example, schizophrenia. This slide shows how certain nutrients are essential for producing neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, and noradrenaline. To produce serotonin, for example, the body needs nutrients such as vitamin B6, vitamin B3, zinc, folate, and magnesium. These helps convert the amino acid tryptophan into 5-hydroxytryptophan, 5-HTP, and then into serotonin. Similarly for dopamine and noradrenaline synthesis, nutrients like vitamin B6, folate, iron, magnesium, vitamin C, and copper are required. These support the conversion of tyrosine into L-dopa, then into dopamine, and finally to noradrenaline. Also, inflammation and oxidative stress. There are plenty of studies about that, the relationship between inflammation and mental disorders. And there are certain ingredients and food can increase inflammatory markers and so that they link to depression and anxiety, for example. Also, the gut-to-brain axis plays a key role in our mental and physical health. The gut is often referred to as the second brain because of the large number of nerves found there and its close connection to the brain. As shown in the image, communication between the gut and the brain happens in two main ways: through neural communication, like vagus nerve, and humoral communication, which involves chemical messengers such as hormones and cytokines. The gut microbiome can change rapidly depending on our diet. Diets rich in fiber, for example, and fermented food helps maintain a healthy gut, which can positively influence mood and cognitive function. Additionally, brain development and the structure, especially during childhood and adolescence, are supported by omega-3 fatty acids and essential vitamins. These nutrients play a role in myelination and synaptic plasticity and gray matter growth. And on the other hand, indirect effects of diet are mostly related to social, emotional, and psychological aspects. These effects may not directly impact the brain or nervous system, but they can still have a significant influence on mental health in general. Poor diet contributes to physical health conditions such as obesity, diabetes, and metabolic disorders, all of which are linked to higher rates of depression and emotional distress. Diet can also affect self-esteem and body image, especially in adolescents. Healthy or unhealthy diet can influence weight, appearance, and overall body satisfaction. These are two studies that highlight the connection between obesity and mental health. On the left side, we see data from a US study showing that 30% of men with depression were obese compared to 32 without depression. A small difference, right? But however, the difference is much more significant in women, where 46 of those with depression were obese compared to 33 without depression. This results in an overall trend: people with depression are more likely to be obese, especially women, which is also reflected in the total population difference of about 10%. The right side shows data from another study examining 8 common psychiatric disorders and their association with obesity. These include nicotine use disorder, schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, depressive episodes, recurrent depression, anxiety disorder, somatization disorder, and personality disorder. Across most of these conditions, people with obesity have higher diagnosis rates, especially females. The only exceptions where the gender difference is reversed or less clear are nicotine use disorder and schizophrenia, where males with obesity show slightly higher rates. This data highlights how obesity not only affects physical health, but is also a significant mental health risk factor, particularly for women. In terms of social functioning, shared family meals can promote emotional bonding and a sense of structure, while chaotic eating habits may reflect or contribute to psychological distress. Also, for example, people who follow certain kind of diets, for example, like someone follow carnivore diet, sometimes maybe you will feel isolated from the other people because of the lack of people who share this kind of diet with them. And to make that social functioning more clear, I would say it's not just about what people eat, but also how they eat. Here we see two images of different dishes from two different cultures. The picture on the left shows mansa, the traditional national dish of Jordan. As you can see, it's a large communal dish, not meant for just one person, but for a group, usually family, friends, or guests. This reflects important cultural values such as generosity and hospitality and social bonding. In Jordanian culture, food is not only biological necessity, it's a symbol of togetherness, a way to express identity, values, and connection. Just as we can't imagine society without individuals, we can't fully understand individuals without their social context, and shared meals are a perfect example of this. On the right, we see a signal burger, a typical example of modern fast food. It's made for just one person and to be eaten quickly, often alone and usually on the go. This kind of food culture emphasizes speed and individualism, often at the expense of human connection. It reflects a lifestyle focused more on productivity and efficiency than on community or shared experience. So food is not just nutrition, it also tells a story about how we live, what we value, and how we connect with others. Academic and cognitive performance, there is a relationship between nutrient-poor diets and impairing attention and memory, and because of that, you will not function very well in terms of your academia and general cognitive performance. So because of that, that will put more stress on you, and that will affect your mental health also. And last and not least, coping and emotional regulation. And this is will tell us something, and that will raise a question: does diet affect mental health, or mental health affect diets? Which one is correct? In fact, both of them are correct. Diet affect our mental health, and our mental health affect our diet. So it's kind of a circle. And because of that, some people they use eating as a coping mechanism. When they feel bad, they go to eat, and when they feel bad again, they go to eat. And because of that, that will be kind of unhealthy coping mechanism, and that will affect their, for example, that will make them obese, for example, and that will affect many things in their physical and mental health. Okay, that will lead us to um, say something about how developmental psychopathology related to diet. We can understand diet as a risk or protective factor. Good and rich diets can protect us from mental disorders to some extent. So because of that, can consider it as a protective factor. And on the other hand, if you have a poor diet, that can be a risk factor for mental disorders. A topic for further investigation, I highly recommend more studies about the relationship between ketogenic diet and mental health, and if it's possible to for us to use ketogenic diet as a mental health intervention in the future. Many big questions about that. Can the ketogenic diet serve as a therapeutic tool for depression, anxiety, or ADHD? If that helped in the past for epilepsy, for example, Even if epilepsy is not a psychological disorder, but neurological disorder, but we know that neurological disorders and psychological disorders are highly correlated to each other. And just for example, to make that more clear to you, for example, people who suffer from schizophrenia, they have high levels of dopamine, right? But you know what will happen for schizophrenic people when they maybe get overdose of a drug? They will suffer from certain symptoms, but what that symptoms are, they are Parkinson symptoms. But Parkinson is not a psychological disorder, but it's a neurological disorder. And that because people who suffer from Parkinson, they have less levels of dopamine compared to normal people. And when schizophrenic people get medications, their dopamine levels will decrease, sometimes under the normal levels, and because of that, they will suffer from Parkinson symptoms. And because of that, if ketogenic diets as an intervention helped in the past with epilepsy, with children and people who suffer from epilepsy and seizures, also that can tell us something about if it's maybe can also be effective if we use it as an intervention for psychological problems. And of course, needs more investigation and study about that. Yeah, that's all. This is my references, and thank you so much for listening.